Sure.
Sure. Can you obviously a lot of people didn't really know about R. Kelly's childhood sexual trauma really until the documentary kind of came out and they really um, delved a little deeper into that. Can you talk about the impact that could have on somebody's mental health, but in particularly on a young Black boy's mental health and trauma? We are often taught or trained that this is not something an older woman seducing a younger man or what have you isn't sexual abuse, and it is.
Mhm. Yeah, I think one of the things that is important for all of us to be thinking about is the fact that child sexual abuse does happen. It does happen in the African American community, and it does happen where males are victims as well. And
Mhm.
so, in terms of some of the significant impacts that it can have, of course, it can cause or contribute to an individual questioning themselves. It could lead to anxiety. It could lead to depression. It could lead to an individual acting out sexually, whether it's, whether it is engaging in sexual exploration as a young person, can lead even into issues in during the teen years as well as early adulthood and well on to adulthood, if not adequately addressed and assessed for. And I
Mhm.
think part of this, when we think about the African American community, number one, we talk about the significant stigma of mental health overall, right?
Right.
And the reluctance to even consider seeing a mental health professional, right? That's already a taboo. Another taboo is we're talking about um, victims that are males, right? And so we live
Right.
in this society where that's not viewed as an issue. It's not viewed as something that's significant or severe. A lot of the times when we talk about childhood sexual abuse, we focus mostly on female victims, and we don't always allow for space to talk about the experiences of young boys, with
Mhm.
the exception of some of the discussions we've heard within the Black church, for example, and in other instances. But primarily, we still don't have a lot of conversations around that. And also, specifically, more information about the perpetrators, as we come to understand, at least what has been reported has been that specifically in this case, this was done by a family member. And
Mhm.
so that's a whole nother element in terms of thinking about family secrets and
Yeah.
what we talk about and what we don't talk about um, outside of the family system.
Right. And that was especially when it comes to young Black boys and sexual abuse, the the silencing of young Black boys, whether it's done by themselves based on how they feel perceived reaction will be, or done by family members that want to, like you said, keep some of those secrets. What are the long-term impact, particularly with young Black boys who've experienced sexual trauma, sexual abuse, and not adequately getting help or treatment or real healing behind that, because not every victim eventually becomes a predator. So what are some of the things that um, Black boys could, what are some things as a community we can do to provide space for any young person, but particularly young Black boys, because it's so unreported?
Sure. So I think, if not addressed, it definitely can lead to problems even in adulthood, in terms of creating anxiety around sexual interaction, intimacy, the ability to connect emotionally and sexually with another person, difficulties in relationships, difficulty creating and sustaining and maintaining relationships over time.
Mhm.
Right. And so things that could potentially lead to domestic violence, sexual abuse, issues around power. When a person is a victim of sexual abuse, whether it's child sexual abuse or even in adulthood, that that initially impacts their perception of power. And a lot of times they feel like they have a lack of power and control, right? And so sometimes there's a need or a push to try to regain that control or that power that perhaps they lost when they were victimized. One of the things that I think is important as we think about specifically how this impacts Black males, I think we also have to think about challenging some of the dominant notions of masculinity or Black masculinity and even toxic masculinity that sort of snickers whenever you hear that a male has had some sexual encounter with an older female, right? Mm-hmm. That's been perceived as okay, acceptable, perhaps even a rite of passage. I mean, we've had other people in the hip hop, industry that have sort of glorified that or talked about that. And so I think we have to sort of work to combat those messages that have been disseminated out there into the community. And we have to provide more awareness as to how these types of issues can impact an individual within a family system, and that can have long-lasting effects if not addressed. And so I think part of it is we have to think about, there's a popular saying that says, secrets keep you sick, right? And so this idea of having to break away from that silence, but no one's gonna come forth if we don't create a safe environment for people to do so. And so I think we have to work on trying to create better messaging around it's okay to talk about this. You're not going to be teased or ridiculed or talked about. And instead, we're going to open our arms and we're going to work with you to try to promote healing.
Right. Now, one of the things that I think this entire case has really highlighted is the struggle that victims of sexual violence, victims of domestic violence, the hurdles that they face in coming forward, particularly his wife, where the public just does not understand, well, you were married to him. Why would you stay, or why would you put up with some of this? There's stigma still very deep regarding domestic violence and sexual violence. Can you speak to, how that dynamic, when you are possibly married to an abuser / narcissist with unhealed trauma, how that could carry on and carry through your marriage, and why somebody like Andrea Kelly would stay?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of what we're talking about is a power imbalance. So someone that is a victim of domestic violence, abuse, whether it is physical violence, emotional abuse, or all of the financial abuse, all of the above, a person can become subdued and fear for their lives. And especially if there's someone who may not have the other access to resources, a person that has children. I mean, these are other reasons why a person might decide to stay. They may feel like it's better for them to stay and keep an eye on things, make sure their children are protected, as opposed to leave. A lot of times, when we hear about domestic violence, one of the reasons that people stay is because they have children. Right. And so sometimes there's this piece around, you can leave, but you can't take the kids with you. Right. And so this piece around, if I'm present, perhaps I can, protect my children. So that's a big piece of that. I think, the other components that I have, been made aware of is there's a lot of people who question, like, well, did you know? Did you not know? How much did you know? Right. Were you complicit? Were you not? These are questions that still remain, to be clarified. But I think, it's still important to recognize that if someone with so much power, resources, whether they're financial resources or even other types of resources, they would have a lot of power and control. Yeah. And that can be challenging for anyone. And even if a person had some ideas or perspectives, they still might have feared for their lives and their children's lives, which could have made it difficult for them to reach out for help.
Absolutely. And I think that's the central thing, really, is this power and control, whether with his spouse, with his children, those relationships, and with the other victims. That is the common theme here. And what I think a lot of people do not understand, particularly when it comes to domestic violence, is that it's twofold. It is power and control in the relationship, and even when you do get out, there's still a threat of that particular person not wanting to relinquish power and control. And when you add celebrity to that, it can make things very complicated. I want to kind of move to, you know, the Surviving R. Kelly docuseries really put the victims, these victims, front and center for public judgment, ridicule, speculation, you name it. But there's been a lot of talk about the women who have stood by his side. Though one who's rumored to possibly be with child, with R. Kelly's child. Can you talk about why, after everything that's been put out, all the documented facts regarding R. Kelly and his history, why a woman would still stay in that situation? A lot of people think, is this a personal choice that she's choosing, or is there something deeper going on?
You know, from my perspective, from what I have been able to learn about and hear, I think it's multifaceted and it is complex. I think, in order to talk about this specifically as it relates to such a major figure, I think we have to bring into context the way in which some of these young ladies, not all of them, but some of these young ladies were introduced, right? And what they were, perhaps, first of all, what their family dynamics were in their own experience, what they did get, what they did not get in their family, in terms of how we raise our family, how we raise children, how we teach them about what's right, what's wrong. So I think it's important. We have to look at that, and how that can set a person up to be vulnerable or more vulnerable than another person, right? I don't know every single victim. I don't know any of them personally. I've never met any of them, never met R. Kelly. But what I can tell you from what I have followed in the media, as well as in the documentary, there seems to be some similarities across the females. And some of them appear to have potentially struggled with self-esteem. And having low self-esteem is, ripe ground for someone to abuse you, and to take advantage of you, right? So I think there's a psychology component to that. Perhaps potentially other types of mental health issues that may have been present previously, perhaps. There's family dynamics. I have to talk about socioeconomic status. I can't talk about this without that context, especially if some people allegedly had dreams of becoming a big person in the industry, becoming a famous singer or performer, so on and so forth. I think there's a piece of that, not just the individual, but even some of the family members, parents, that may have been may have played an influence on young people to get close to, perhaps I would say with good intentions, but things can happen when you have a vulnerable person potentially around a person that has the capacity to be a predator, right? With no supervision or lack of supervision or lack of significant supervision. So I think there's some components to that. But you're right, you have to talk about age and development over time, right? So we're talking primarily about young people, young women, and who are still growing and developing and becoming who they are. So if you have someone that says you're beautiful, I want to make you a star, or I can make you a star.
Mm-hmm.
I can give you something that you've never seen before, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do we expect? Someone's
Right.
going to say, oh, really? Show me, teach me. I want to be, your protege, and those types of things. So there's a psychological component in that way. And people can get sucked in. They
Yeah.
can completely get sucked in to the extent that, things can set in, depression can set in, the inability to like understand right from wrong can become cloudy,
Yeah.
right? And I think people can sometimes develop some type of a empathy for this individual, in particular, this storyline, given some of the things that allegedly happened to him, right? And so you add all these components together, it is a playground for disaster waiting to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think even when some people, some women have come forth, they through, courage and just the ability to find something within to be able to ask for help or to escape or to figure out a way to remove themselves. Others find it challenging. And I think for people who've been, connected for so long, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like I'd rather stay with someone that's abusing me than go to someone that I've never encountered. At least I know this person's issues, their hangups. I sort of know them. And there's a certain level of comfort there in that discomfort, right? And so there's been a lot of talk about the Stockholm syndrome and this idea of, some of his victims having this sort of empathy for him, right? Feeling bad. So then when you have something that plays out in the media, there will be some people that are going to say, you guys are continuing to beat up on him. Right. You guys are continuing to violate him. He is a, young person in the mindset who needs love and attention. And I'm the one that can give it to him.
Yeah. I find it interesting because I think I remember the comedian Dave Chappelle in one of his specials said, how old is 16 really? When he was talking about their victims, almost kind of making it seem like, 16, you're old enough to know if this is something you're okay with. But you're again talking about teenagers whose minds are not fully developed until 22, 24, scientific, biologically.
Correct.
That with celebrity, with potential family issues and or just the self-esteem issues that come with being a regular, normal teenager. It doesn't even have to be something very dramatic at home. But to see the response from the public and not understanding how somebody very influential in life, very famous, very rich, how that could be appealing to a teenager who has aspirations of, fame and success. How I noticed there's a certain protectiveness that some of his victims had when they were defending him so passionately. Is this all kind of tied up into narcissism? Is there a difference, I guess, between untreated trauma and narcissism, or can both exist with a predator?
Yeah, I think both can exist with a predator. I think the added elements around fame and having an extreme amount of wealth and having a lot of resources, people that will do whatever you ask of them, I think that is something that can help to breed narcissism. And then that leads to abuse of power and leads to, one thinking that they can do anything they want to do and get away with anything. And, for many years, presumably have never faced significant consequences for negative behavior, right? And so when that happens, then that leads to that person thinking even more so that they're invincible. And I think part of the other issue, we have a major issue within the Black community as it relates to this, because as you mentioned, there's a lot of polarizing thoughts about this whole experience. And one of the things that that we have to also consider is how we think about this within the context of our culture. How do we think about Black men, right? Because what we know is that Black men are protected by some in the African-American community, given that they are often hunted by police officers and incarcerated at disproportionate rates. Right. And so this also leads to a lack of Black women in particular calling the police on their significant others because out of fear of not wanting them to become incarcerated, right? So this whole piece around we have to protect him because he's a Black male. And right. I think that we don't often talk about that because it's not just the victims that actually worked to protect him. There are people in the community that still, revere him and, think so much of him and want to sort of see him a certain way. And I think we unfortunately, we sometimes can't distinguish between, someone and who they are and what they do. And I think unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you think about this, there's this need, this desire to protect Black men because of the things that have happened. I mean, we're talking about R. Kelly juxtaposed against a George Floyd. Right. We can't talk about one without talking about the other. Obviously, different circumstances, different situations, different behaviors, but there's this overarching need and desire, I think, within the Black community and specifically among African-American women that want to protect Black men. And sometimes to the detriment of the Black community. Absolutely.
And I think we also have to look at how we look at young Black girls, because there seems to be this, if it was a 15, 14-year-old white girl who found herself enamored with R. Kelly and abused, I don't know if we would be questioning whether or not they knew better or whether or not they had the capacity to know better. Do you find that, the judgment of young Black girls, particularly the policing of our bodies and how we're perceived as fast, plays a part in protecting sexual predators who, that have been in our community that people know about? Does that play a role in that culturally?
Absolutely. I think we have a lot of problems in the Black community, and I think one of them is how we view Black women and specifically Black girls. We view them as highly sexual, and we view them as highly disposable. We don't protect Black women and we don't protect Black girls. And I think we have lots of evidence of this, whether we're talking about, anything related to this story, whether we're talking about Brittany Griner, whether we're talking about all these other things that are happening all around us. Right. We do not protect Black women and we do not protect Black girls. And I think because of that, we allow things to happen that should not happen. We don't hold people accountable. And we also have this other component where we expect Black women to be so strong, right, that they're supposed to be able to deal with it, manage it, cope with it, and they're supposed to deal with the abuse, raise the children, take care of the community all simultaneously. And I think that it is completely disrespectful, and it contributes to the breakdown of the Black community.
Absolutely. Now, as we, a lot of these women who have told their stories, there's been a lot of focus on their, what they went through, but how do victims of sexual abuse, sexual trauma, including R. Kelly, what are things that they can do to heal from that? Because I don't know if you can ever release it fully, but what are some things that can help a victim move forward without the weights of holding those secrets?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that's important is we have to give voice to our experiences. We have to talk about our experiences. I think one of the things about the Black community in particular, but even other communities, is that we want to hold everything in. We want to pretend like something didn't happen. And then sometimes we want to rationalize other people's behavior, right? We have to call a thing, right? So we have to talk about our experiences and our trauma so that we can not only talk about them, but help ourselves to sort of explicate what's inside of us, right? So some of the pain, the guilt, the shame, the questioning, did I do something that caused this? So all these things that go along with a person who may have been victimized sexually, we have to sort of get rid of those things. And so we have to give voice to our experiences. We have to talk to other people, and we need to be in a safe space where we can talk about our concerns and our issues without judgment. And so that's why I really advocate for people to not only work with a licensed mental health professional, but also to get other support too, like support groups and things like that can be helpful, because sometimes there is power with numbers and with shared experience. And so one of the things that is unique about this story is that there are lots of people who have come forward. And my hope is that they can come together and continue to work together to promote some of that healing, albeit they all have their own individual experiences, but there's a commonality that they share that can be helpful in talking through. I think that it's also important to engage in practices to keep ourselves safe, right? And so if you've had this experience, how do you move forward beyond this? How do you ensure that you will be safe? And how do you make sure that, your children will be safe? So thinking about not staying stuck in the past, but you have to sort of go through and explain and uncover the things that have happened in order to heal. In my mindset, it's sort of like it's sort of like you have to uncover in order to discover so that you can recover. And a lot of times we're so afraid to talk about it. We're ashamed. We feel guilty. We feel like we're going to be judged, and rightly so, because a lot of times people are judged. Right? People are ridiculed. People's names are thrown around. I've seen some of the social media commentary. I could see how someone would be afraid to come forth. And so we have to continue to create safe spaces and dialogue, open dialogue, not only at the individual level, but at the community level, at the family level, in order to combat this in a way that is multifaceted.
Yeah. I was going to ask you what you thought as a community, because I really think, and this goes obviously beyond the R. Kelly trial, in any cases of abuse, rape, incest, the silence in our community, along with the judgment, if a victim speaks out, how as a community, as a Black community, can we come together and provide safe spaces for our young people, for our men, for our young boys who may have experienced sexual trauma? What are things as a community we need to be doing?
Yeah, definitely. I think, we need the entire community, right? This means we need not only Black women, but we need Black men. Black men have to be a part of this conversation. And I think that they have to see themselves as part of the conversation and even play a role in leading some of the conversations, because part of this also, it's a community issue, it's a family issue, it's a parenting issue. It's like all these different components. But, when I think about the Black male and where is the Black male? That's the first question. And how do we get the Black male back involved, right, in the Black family, to be a leader in the community? Like I think we have to find creative ways to include Black men in these conversations. And I'm saying this as a mental health professional that works a lot with single parent families. I see the way in which families are constructed. And in my mind, I'm thinking about how the absence of a person that could potentially play a role in parenting might be able to, in leadership, might be able to assist in this conversation and dialogue, right? It's a community issue. Therefore, it's an issue that affects Black men and Black women. I think other types of public health, mental health, and community-based messaging needs to go out. And we need to facilitate open conversations and dialogues. It needs to start in the home, but it has to include the schools. It has to include, faith-based organizations, given that these institutions also play a significant role in either helping the African-American community or contributing to trauma in the African-American community. And so we have to think about how do we use those key players, right? Whether it's the pastors or the teachers in the community that can help play a role in helping us to address these issues. But like I said, it has to be people that are open and interested in playing a role in this conversation, because as we all know, there have been people who've been victimized within faith-based organizations as well.
Right. Now I have to ask you, it's been a lot of talk. R. Kelly has had years and years of untreated and unhealed trauma. Is there rehabilitation for someone at this stage in their life?
That is a great question. I can answer that in two different ways. One of them is that as a licensed marriage and family therapist, as someone who's worked in the field for many years, I believe that anyone can be helped, but it takes intentionality, it takes consistency, and it takes a lot of hard work and effort on behalf of the individual. And I think, however, the motivation has to come internally, right? So I can't help you if you don't want to be helped, right? There's some other components to that I think makes this specific situation far more difficult. And that is, there's been a long history of not having to deal with consequences.
Yeah.
Right. So this idea so essentially what I'm saying is that perhaps he is heavily rooted in his mindset. Right? Since it's been such a long time, never having significant consequences, it might take a while just to break through to him, right? And to be honest, in my opinion, just incarceration is not going to do the trick, right? We know incarceration is about correction, which makes sense in terms of that, but it doesn't necessarily rehabilitate an individual regarding a mental health issue. Yes, there are some prisons and systems within prisons that offer counseling and offer, individual intervention and group therapy. But in my mind, this individual will require something more significant and severe, and it might take quite some time to break through to him.
Nothing can happen without starting with some accountability.
100%. And if that is not there, that is a barrier and will contribute to the problem not being able to be addressed.
Agreed, 100%.